Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Vayechi, begins on page 269. It is Bereshis, chapter 47, verse 28. And it says, Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, were 147 years. The time approached for Yisrael to die, so he called for a son for Yosef and said, please, if I have found favor in your eyes, please place your hand under my thigh and do kindness and truth with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt. And we've seen this with Abraham, that at this point in time, the mitzvah that they had was the mitzvah of bris milah, of circumcision. So the same way we'd place our hand on the Bible to make a swear an oath, he had Yosef place his hand on that mitzvah, the mitzvah that they had. And said, do not bury me in Egypt, for I will lie down with my fathers, and you shall transport me out of Egypt and bury me in their tomb. He said, I personally will do as you have said. He replied, swear to me, and he swore to him. Then Israel prostrated himself towards the head of the bed. So a few things about this. First of all, when he asked him to make this oath, he said in verse 29, please, if I have found favor in your eyes, please place your hand under my thigh and do kindness and truth with me. This is kindness and truth. And to this day, the Hebrew for that is chesed ve'emes. We talked about it, Alan. The Hebrew is chesed ve'emes. And this is the reason why the burial societies traditionally are called chesed shalemes. That means kindness or kindness with truth. And our sages say that's because it's that burial, taking care of our deceased, is true kindness because it's a favor that they can't repay us. That when people do favors for others, many times they're doing the favor, even if they have the best of intentions, but you expect them to reciprocate. And I know people get disturbed if like they send a gift and they don't get a thank you card. People get very disturbed by that. So, and whereas by when we assist in a burial, when we assist in taking care of the dignity of our deceased. So they're not sending us any thank you cards. They're not reciprocating the favor in this lifetime. And that's true kindness. Additionally, the Klei Akar explains this, that there was really two things that Yaakov asked. That he asked to be buried, that Yosef would take care of his burial, and that he doesn't bury him, really three things. He doesn't bury him in Egypt, he buries him in Canaan. So he said he has two approaches. The one, he says the truth means what's required. What's absolutely necessary is truth. You have to do. And that is, he said, bury him, period. To bury him is truth. That's an obligation that's incumbent on a child, is to take care of the needs of their deceased parent. So that's truth. But to go out of his way to bury him in Israel, that's already kindness. That's not something that's normally that he's obligated in. Or he says that he couldn't be buried in Egypt because he didn't want to be buried in Egypt. One of the reasons our sages give is that he was concerned that the Egyptians would worship him. His burial site would become a shrine, and the Egyptians would worship him there. So he couldn't be buried in Egypt, but not being buried in Egypt doesn't mean being buried in the land of Canaan. They could have just taken him outside of Egypt, buried him there. Burying him in Canaan is kindness as opposed to truth, which is burying him outside of Egypt. Okay, and in verse 31, he made him swear. So why did he make him swear an oath? Did he not trust the son to do what he asked him to do? So our sages say that this was to give Yosef leverage over Paro, because Paro he knew that, they both knew that Paro would not want him to, first of all, would not want Yosef to leave Egypt. He was the viceroy. To just take a break and go off to bury his father out of the country wasn't so simple. And Paro, like we said, the Egyptians would have worshipped Yaakov, would have worshipped his burial place, and Paro would have wanted to have his burial place in Egypt. That would bring blessing to Egypt. So, but the fact that Yosef had swore, he could go to Paro and not just say, my father asked me, but to say, I swore an oath that I'm going to do this, that would give him additional pressure. Okay, so he was dying, and chapter 48, verse 1. Oh, and one more thing. It says that Israel prostrated himself towards the head of the bed. What's the prostrating himself towards the head of the bed? So our sages say that this is a Gemara and actually in Nedarim. Is Daf Yomi still in Nedarim?
Yes.
Fred? They're still in Nadarim, Fred? Or
Yes.
Barry? Yes? Okay, and Sid. Oh, wow,
Well,
we're full of
unanimous.
Dafyomi people here. Yeah.
Unanimous.
We thought you
So,
were Rabbi.
I actually gave this class. I was substituting when Rabbi Loeb was out of town, and the Gemara in Nadarim says that that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests on the bed of the deceased. And the Gemara says for that reason, a person should stand up when they visit someone who's sick. So, and it quotes a verse from Psalms, Hashem Yesadenu al Eretz Devai, that Hashem supports us on our deathbed. That the divine presence is there with us. So that's why Yaakov bowed down to the foot of his bed, to the head of the bed. Okay, so then as he's dying in chapter 48, it was told to Yosef that he was dying, so he took his two sons Ephraim and Manasseh with him. And in verse 2, Yaakov was told, "Behold, your son Yosef has come to you." So Israel inserted himself and sat up on the bed. Page 271. Our sages say this teaches us that it's incumbent on us to show respect to royalty. That one could say, and this makes a lot of sense, that a king, someone, the president, whomever it may be, he's a man just like any other man. He's not, he's not any better than me, any better than you. He's someone that happens to be either voted or by the mandate of the masses or through his strong arming, became in charge, and he's running things. So one could say that as long as he's not looking and we won't get in trouble, there's no reason to show him any more respect than anyone else. And here the Torah is telling us that Yaakov exerted himself to set up in the bed, even though he was very sick, because it's appropriate to show respect to someone who Hashem allowed to be in charge. And in verse 3, Yaakov said to Yosef, Kel Shakai has appeared to me in Luz. God appeared to me in Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me. He said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous. I will make you a congregation of nations. And I will give this land to your offspring after you as an eternal possession. And our sages say that when Hashem said he'll make him a congregation of nations, all his children were born at that point, and Binyamin, except Binyamin, but Binyamin, Rachel was already expecting Binyamin at that point. So when he said, I'll make you a congregation of nations, he was telling him that he would have more children. And he said, I realized that wasn't referring to children directly from me. Rather, it's that your children will be as if they're mine. And therefore, he continues in verse 5, and now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before my coming to you in Egypt shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine like Reuben and Shimon. For progeny born to you after them shall be yours. They will be included under the name of their brothers with regard to their inheritance. So two things. First of all, he's saying that we've mentioned this before, that when Reuven sinned by getting involved in his father's marital life, so the firstborn rights were taken away from Reuven and given, who was the firstborn, Yaakov's firstborn, and given to Yosef, who was the firstborn from Yaakov's wife, Rachel. So, and one of the rights or privileges of the firstborn is that they get a double portion in their father's estate. And for that reason, Yosef had two portions. He had Ephraim and Manasseh, both had equal portions, just like the other brothers. And the Ramban also comments that from the fact that the Torah finds it necessary to tell him that if you have any other children, those children will not have this privilege. It's just Ephraim and Manasseh. So the Ramban says it must be that Yosef in fact did have other children, or else this would be irrelevant, and the Torah doesn't contain anything irrelevant. So he says that Yosef did in fact have other sons other than Ephraim and Manasseh. Just when it comes to the tribes, they're just absorbed into the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Yes, Alan? Yosef married Asnas bas Potiphera. Asnas bas Potiphera. Asnas, the daughter of Potiphera, the Kohen owned. There are midrashim about. Yes. Yes.
He ended up marrying the daughter.
That's yes. And there are midrashim that this was adopted and it was Dinah or a daughter from Yaakov's family. There are other midrashim. What the Torah says, though, is Asnas, the daughter of Potiphera. Yes.
Kind of go and say last night the Ephraim and Manasseh is the same as
which I've never.
He said,
Yeah.
I think it's one off. He said which sets the, I guess you can.
Yeah, you could be one off with gematrias. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, we'll get to gematria in a minute. I think, unless I missed it. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so let's continue. So Ephraim and Manasseh are going to be like Reuven and Shimon, and the Ramban says that Yosef did have other sons, but they are absorbed into the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. So it continues in verse 7. But as for me, when I came from Padan and Rachel died on me on the land in the land of Canaan on the road while there was still a stretch of land to go to Ephras, and I buried her there on the road to Ephras, which is Beis Lechem, which is Bethlehem. So why is he bringing this up now? It's because Yaakov had asked Yosef to go through all the trouble of taking him all the way to the land of Canaan from Egypt to bury him there. And Yosef could have a complaint. My mother died, and you didn't bury her in our family burial place. You buried her at the side of the road. And so to that, Yaakov was saying that you understand why we did that. That she died on the where am I? Yeah, she died on the road leading to Ephras, and it was the
City.
right. And Yaakov was told, "Don't turn around." Right. But no, that was someone else. So that was Lot's wife. Rachel died in childbirth with Binyamin, and he died. And it's actually the Zohar says about this that Leah and Rachel, the Torah both describes them as crying. That Leah cried because she wanted to marry Yaakov, therefore she was buried with Yaakov. Rachel cried for children. That Rachel was childless and she cried for children, therefore she was buried in the place that when the time comes and her descendants are going into exile, being exiled to Babylon, they would cry that her graveside was on the side of the road, and they passed there on the way and cried at her graveside, and she begged Hashem to be merciful for her children, and in fact, Hashem promised her to that they'll be redeemed. Okay. Okay, then in verse 8, then Israel saw Yosef's sons and says, "Who are these?" And Yosef said to his father, "They're my sons whom God has given me here." So what happened there? They've been talking about his sons until now. So our sages say the Medrash says that that he saw them and he saw he saw the wicked descendants that will come from them. That from Ephraim will come Yeravam ben Nevat, who was the king who. I'm sorry. Rechavam and Yeravam. Rechavam was the. Sorry, I'm confusing myself. I think it's Yeravam, who was the king who rebelled against Yehuda and seceded the north away and caused the Israelites to sin, caused them to worship idolatry. And then there was Achav, who was also a descendant of Ephraim, who also caused tremendous idolatry, and Yehu and his sons were also wicked kings of the north, who were descendants of Manasseh, of Manasseh. So when he saw these descendants, he says, like, who are these? Like, are these really appropriate for blessings? And Yosef said to his father, "They are my sons whom God has given me here." And our sages explain that what Yosef was saying is that they're my sons, and just by virtue of that, they should be blessed. And he's saying that these descendants that you see, these wicked descendants, are not the result of them being my sons. They're the result of being from here, that they were born in Egypt, and even though they were somewhat insulated and well educated, but the environment had caused some level of corruption in them. And the environment of Egypt, as Rabbi Slater said last week, it was a sewer of spiritual corruption, of immorality. And that caused some level of corruption that in later generations came and manifested itself. Okay, so then he replied, I'll bless them. And in verse 10, now Israel's eyes were heavy with age, and he could not see. So he brought them near to him, and he kissed them and hugged them. Israel said to Yosef, I dared not accept the thought that I would see your face, and here God has shown me even your offspring. A very emotional moment for him. And Yosef removed them. And Yosef took the two of them, Ephraim with his right hand to Israel's left, and Manasseh, this is on verse 13 on page 273. And Manasseh with his left to Israel's right, with the understanding that Yaakov would put his right hand on the firstborn of Manasseh and his left hand on the younger Ephraim. But Israel extended his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head. He maneuvered his hands, he crossed them, for Manasseh was the firstborn. He blessed Joseph, and he said, from my inception until this day, may the angel who redeemed me from all evil bless the lads, and may my name be declared upon them, and the names of my forefathers Avram and Yitzchak, and may they proliferate abundantly like fish within the land. Okay, so what's the meaning of this? So to begin with, or actually I'll start and work my way backwards a little bit, that he said, this is something traditionally we say before we go to sleep, may the angel who redeems me from all evil bless the lads. I think Rabbi Bachia points out that in fact we find that there's the greatest descendant of Ephraim and the greatest descendant of Manasseh both had a visit from angels that blessed them. And Yeshua was visited by an angel and instructed him. And it says that in the book of Yeshua, it says that he saw a man that had a double-edged sword that he was threatened by, and that was in fact an angel that blessed him. And the greatest descendant of Manasseh, he was a descendant of Ephraim, and the greatest descendant of Manasseh was Gideon, who was also visited by an angel. So this was the angel that had saved Yaakov from all evil. Then he blessed his sons that they would be privileged by visits from this angel as well, and that's what happened. But it says earlier that, O God, before whom my forefathers Avram and Yitzchak walked, God who shepherds me from my inception until this day. So what's shepherds me from my inception until this day? So the Hebrew for that is, I told you we'll do some gematrias. So the Hebrew for, it's verse 15. Got to find it in the Hebrew. So the Hebrew for Me'odi, from my inception, is the numerical value is 30 plus 70 is 110, plus 6 plus 4 is 120, plus Yud is 130. So it's 130, and that's how long Yaakov lived before he went to Egypt. He lived 130 years when he was 130 years old when he came to Egypt. So he's saying the God who shepherded me from me at my inception means the God who kept me and protected me and sustained me before I came to Egypt. And then he continues that until this day, and he continued until this day, the Hebrew hazeh is 17. And that's the 17 years that he was in Egypt. So he was saying that God shepherded me before I came here. And even after Yaakov came to Egypt, when Yosef took care of him and provided him with everything he needed, he said he still recognized that's all from Hashem. And he blessed him that this angel should bless his sons, and his name should be declared on them, and the names of their forefathers Avram and Yitzchak, that they should be called the descendants of Yaakov, which in fact is what we're called. We're called Bnei Yisrael, the descendants of Israel. That's the name of Yaakov, and we're called descendants of Yitzchak, descendants of Avram. And may they proliferate abundantly like fish within the land. That fish have a tremendous amount of offspring. And then Yosef protested. He saw that Yaakov had switched it, and Yaakov said, I know, but Manasseh is also going to be great, but Ephraim is going to be even greater. And like I mentioned, that their great descendants, the great descendant of Manasseh was Gideon, who was great. He was a great leader of the Jewish people in the time before the first king, before Saul. But Yeshua, who was descendant from Ephraim, was even greater. He's the one who led us when we first entered the land of Israel and led us in the conquest of the land of Israel.
The first king.
The first king was King Saul. Yes. And in verse 20, so he blessed them on that day, saying, by you shall Israel bless, on page 275, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. That every will want our sons to be like Ephraim and Manasseh. And in fact, this is a traditional blessing that a father gives his children on Shabbos, as Shabbos starts. And he put Ephraim before Manasseh again. And it continues, verse 21. Then Israel said to Yosef, behold, I'm about to die. Hashem will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your fathers. And as for me, I've given you Shechem, one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of Amorite, with my sword and with my bow. So he gave him Shechem, and that's the burial place of Yosef. There's the famous tomb of Yosef in Shechem, which unfortunately has been destroyed and vandalized many times because it's in Shechem, is the Arab word is Nablus, and and it continues that which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. So if you remember from previous parshas, that how did we conquer Shechem? So Shechem had kidnapped Dinah, the prince of Shechem kidnapped Dinah and wanted to marry her, and Shimon and Levi told them that if you all circumcise yourselves, if all the men of the city circumcise themselves, we'll you can marry her, we'll intermarry, we'll join you. And then the third day after the bris milah, when they were the most infirm, they went through and killed everyone in the city. Yes. So what's Yaakov saying? That I took it with my sword and with my bow. So the Medrash says that after this happened, all the surrounding Canaanites were furious about this, and they stood up and mustered an army to attack attack Yaakov and his sons. And Yaakov actually took up arms to fight back. Whereas the Rambando says that we find it by prophecies that there are times that a prophet doesn't just say, thus says God, the following, but he also does an action. And he says we find this with Elisha, that he gave the king a bow. He told the king to put an arrow in the bow and shoot the arrow, and that'll be a sign that you're going to conquer. And here also, he says that Yaakov actually took a sword and waved a sword and took a bow and shot it. And this was an action that solidified the prophecy that they were going to conquer the land of Israel. And he was saying once this action took place, it's as if it's already conquered. Okay, then Yaakov got all his sons together and he blessed them. So in verse 3 on page 275, he said, Reuven, you are my firstborn, my strength, my initial vigor, foremost in rank and foremost in power. The Medrash says that foremost in rank means that he was supposed to be the Kohen, the Levi, the one who serves Hashem, and most in power means he was supposed to be the king. These are all by virtue of him being the firstborn. But it continues that water-like impetuosity. Yeah, basically he acted without thinking, too quickly without thinking. You cannot be foremost. That a king cannot be like that. A king has to act in a well-considered manner and not be impetuous. And so he could not be king. You cannot be foremost because you mounted your father's bed. You desecrated him who ascended my couch. Once again, this is a reference to when he got involved in his father's marital life. So next, and the Barbanel asks, is this a blessing? It says that he blessed his sons, and then it seems like he's rebuking him. But the Barbanel says that the beginning of this statement, my strength, foremost in rank and foremost in power, he says actually mirrors the blessing that Moshe gave the tribe of Reuven, which was it's a bracha. I should know this. I'm just blinking. Oh, Yechi Reuven v'hi misav mispar. He says, may Reuven live and not die. May his population be included in the count. That he was blessing him. That and what the blessing that he should be included in the count is because Reuven took a portion on the other side of the Jordan River, and part of the deal for that was that he would have to go in the vanguard when they attacked the land of Canaan. He was leading the battle from the front. So he was blessed that he should be kept safe, and and he had to be numerous and mighty, and that's this blessing that he's like foremost in rank and foremost in power means he was blessed with the strength to be able to lead the conquest of the land of Israel. Okay, next comes Shimon and Levi in verse 5. Shimon and Levi are comrades. Their weaponry is a stolen craft. Into their conspiracy may my soul not enter, with the congregation do not join, O my honor. For in their rage they murdered people, and at their whim they hamstrung an ox. So their rage they murdered people, referring to the city of Shechem, which we spoke about earlier, that they were the ringleaders of that destruction. And at the whim they hamstrung an ox is referring to they were the ones who were also who initiated and led the plot against Yosef. And an ox is referring to Yosef, as we see later. But he said in verse 6, into their conspiracy may my soul not enter, and with their congregation do not join. So he says that this is all referring to descendants of Shimon and Levi, and into the conspiracy may my soul not enter is referring to, I could have this backwards, one of them is referring to Zimri, who was a leader from the tribe of Shimon, who when they had Midianite and Moabite women, who had infiltrated the camp, so Zimri publicly took a Midianite princess and said, and publicly brought her into his tent to have his way with her, in spite of the fact of Moshe telling him not to. And so Yaakov was saying, I don't want to be associated with that. And also with Korach, who was a descendant of the tribe of Levi, who rebelled against Moshe and tried to have a coup. He tried to depose Moshe. So he said, I don't want to be associated with him either. Okay, so now verse 8. Yehuda, your brothers shall acknowledge your hand will be at your enemy's nape, and your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. Telling Yehuda, you'll be acknowledged as the leader, as the king. A lion cub is Yehuda from the prey, my son, you elevated yourself. He crouches, lies down like a lion, and like an awesome lion, who dares rouse him? They say, you don't wake a sleeping a sleeping dog? You don't wake a sleeping lion. When there's a lion sleeping, you let it sleep and tiptoe around it. They're saying that was Yosef. You don't want to get on his, to be at the end of his attack. And the scepter shall not depart from Yehuda, nor a scholar from among his descendants, until Shiloh arrives, and his will be an assemblage of nations. That Yehuda will be the scepter, meaning the kings will come from Yehuda. Once the kings start coming from Yehuda, it won't leave, and there'll be great scholars. The Nesiim, the greatest scholars of the time of the Mishnah, were also descendants of Yehuda. And until the Shiloh arrives, referring to the Mashiach, and then it continues that he will tie his donkey to the vine branch, his donkey is full, will launder his garment in wine, his robe in the blood of grapes, meaning that his portion in the land of Israel will be incredibly productive with grapes and wine. And red-eyed from wine and white-toothed from milk, that he'll have, once again, lots of grapes and healthy grapes for wine, and also lots of milk. I think they got their milk from goats mostly, and they'll raise them also well. Okay, and verse 13, Zevulun shall settle by the seashore, he shall be at the ship's harbor, and his last border will reach Sidon. The Zevulun will be great. They have a port as in their portion, and they'll be merchants. Yisachar is a strong-boned donkey in verse 14. He rests between the boundaries. He saw tranquility, that it was good in the land, that it was pleasant, yet he bent his shoulder to bear, and he became an indentured laborer. Our sages say that this is a metaphor for Torah study, that Yisachar were the people from the tribe of Yisachar were outstanding in their Torah study, and it's referring to that a donkey is an animal that just bears its burden without complaint, and Yisachar bends down to the yoke of the Torah and is outstanding in its study. And in verse 16, Dan will avenge his people, the tribe of Israel will be united as one. And I say this is referring specifically to Shimshon, the great Samson, the great descendant of Dan. Dan will be a serpent on the highway, a viper by the path that bites a horse's heel so that its rider falls backwards. For your salvation do I long, O Hashem. And I say, once again, this is referring to Shimshon from the tribe of Dan, who was not the type, he did not lead an army when he battled against the Philistines, the enemies of the Jews at the time. He kind of lived among them, and he like a snake. There's camouflage there. Like you don't know that it's there. It's in the grass, and then it just strikes. and it strikes alone. You don't have like an army of snakes coming at a person. There's just a solitary snake, as it says, it bites at the horse's heel, so the rider falls backward. And that's referring to when Shimshon's last great act, that he was entrapped by his wife, who was a Philistine, and the Philistines had tied him between two pillars, and all the great men of all the leaders of the Philistines were inside the building watching the entertainment, them entertain themselves with him. And he prayed to Hashem for one last act of strength, and he pulled down the building. He was tied to two pillars, and he pulled down the pillars, and the building fell down on all of the Philistines and himself, and he died along with all the Philistine leaders, and that really crippled the Philistines and allowed the Jews to come out from under their yoke. And that's the bites the horse's heel, so the rider falls backward. That it's an indirect strike. It's an indirect attack, and that's how he operated. And that's why it concludes, for your salvation to our long ho Hashem. Our sages say that when Yaakov saw Shimshon, it says the great acts of might that this person does, he has to be the redeemer of the Jewish people. That they were under they were under the heel of the Philistines, and he saw that the great acts of might and valor that he performed. It's like, this is the Redeemer. He's going to ultimately redeem the Jewish people. And then he saw his death, and he said, I still long for your salvation. Okay, so now in verse 19, God will recruit a regiment and will retreat on its heel, meaning that God had a portion at on the east side of the Jordan, so they were really at the frontier. They were great warriors, and they retreat on this heel, meaning that they go back home the same way that they left, and without danger. And then Asher in verse 20, from Asher, his bread will have richness, and he will provide kingly delicacies. That Asher's land was very blessed with olives. And that's where they got the olives for the oil of the light of the menorah. And then in verse 21, Naphtali is a hind let loose who delivers beautiful sayings. That is cropped, or sages say its crops ripen swiftly like a hind let loose, or they were very fast. And the beautiful sayings, actually, the Medrash says that Devorah was one of the leaders of the Jewish people also in that period of time. After we went into the land of Canaan before the first king, we had a number of leaders. Devorah was one of them. And she had a great victory over I think it was the Amorites, and over Sisera. Afterwards, she sang a song, a divinely inspired song of praise to Hashem. And that was really brought about. Most of our army was from the tribe of Naphtali. So they triggered this victory. They brought about this victory that caused these beautiful sayings to be proclaimed. In verse 22, Yosef. A charming son is Yosef, a charming son to the eye. Each of the girls climbed heights to gaze. That he was beautiful, and the girls would climb up the walls to try to get a glimpse. But it continues in verse 23 on page 283. They embittered him and became antagonistic. The arrow-tongued men hated him, but his bow was firmly in place. His arms were gilded from the hands of mighty power from Yaakov. From there he shepherded the stone of Israel. He took care of Yaakov, the stone of Israel, the rock of Israel. So I think that's the Barbanel who says that this is explaining why it was that Yehuda was made the king and not Yosef. About Yehuda, it said that all his brothers accept him. By Yosef, it says that they embittered him, became antagonistic. That for some reason, this was just the personality, is that Yehuda's might and valor and greatness inspired them to follow him and to love him. Whereas Yosef's greatness inspired them to be jealous, caused jealousy. And that's why Yehuda had to be king and not Yosef. Okay, that was from the God of your father, and he will help you, and with Shakai, who will bless you with blessings of heaven from above, blessings of deep crouching below, blessings of the bosom and womb. Blessings of your father surpass the blessings of my parents, and the endless bounds of the world's hills. Let them be upon Yosef's head and upon the head of his exile from his brothers. So remember, Yosef was the beloved son of his father, and he gave him these beautiful blessings about how he was hated by his brothers and was exiled by his brothers. Yet he came out and became very powerful and supported his father. And then it concludes with the last of the tribes, verse 27. Binyamin is a predatory wolf. In the morning he will devour prey, and then in the evening he will distribute spoils. So there's many explanations for what this means. One is that we mentioned that in the morning is referring to the dawn of the Jewish kings, and that was, as Fred brought up, that was Shaul, King Saul, who was from the tribe of Binyamin. And in the evening, he will divide the spoils, is referring to the evening means at the end of the Jewish kings. That's with the destruction of the first temple. So at that time, we were led by Mordechai, who of the Purim miracle that took place during our exile in Persia, which is it was an extension of the exile in Babylon. The Babylonians were conquered by the Persians and the Medes. So and Mordechai was from the tribe of Binyamin. So like we were led by Yehuda. I'm sorry, we were led by Shaul in the beginning, and we were led by Mordechai at the end, and that's the morning and the evening that's referring to here. And it concludes that all of these are the tribes of Israel, 12, and what their father spoke to them, and then he asked them to bury him in Maresa Machpelah, and that's what they did. He asked Paro if he could go, and Paro gave him permission. So it says on page 287, in verse 10, it says, like, all the brothers escorted him. They came to Goren HaAtad, which is across the Jordan. They held a great and imposing eulogy, and he ordered a 7-day mourning period for his father. When the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning in Goren HaAtad, they said, this is a grievous mourning for Egypt. Therefore, it was named Avel Mitzrayim, meaning the mourning of Egypt. Mourning, Mourn, like the eulogies of Egypt, which is across the Jordan. And they buried him in the cave of Machpelah with his father and mother and with his wife Leah. And then in verse 15 on page 287, Yosef's brothers who had perceived that their father was dead, and they said, perhaps Yosef will nurse hatred against us, then he will surely repay us all the evil we did to him. So they instructed Yosef to be told, your father gave orders before his death on page 289, saying, thus shall he say to Yosef, oh, please kindly forgive the spiteful deed that we did. And Yosef wept when they spoke to him. And in verse 18, they flung themselves before him, and so will be your slaves. And in verse 19, but Yosef said to them, fear not, for am I instead of God? Is it my place to punish you? Although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, in order to accomplish that it is clear this day that a vast people be kept alive, that he kept alive all of Egypt and all of his family. So now fear not, I will sustain you and your young ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke to their heart. And our sages say that Yaakov never really knew that they sold him into slavery. He may have been divinely inspired in their blessings to hint at it, but he never really knew. And for all he knew, Yosef was wandering around looking for his brothers and was caught by a group that sold him into slavery. No. This was not the truth. When they said your father said, don't take revenge, that was not in fact true. But our sages say that one is allowed to bend the truth for the sake of peace. Maybe if a man's wife asks, like, does this make me look fat? For the sake of peace, we are allowed to, and it's the right thing to do to bend for shalom bayis, or not just shalom bayis, for shalom in general. That sometimes peace isn't always in the house. It can be in the community. It could be in our neighbors, and sometimes it's appropriate to bend the truth for the sake of peace. So in verse 22, Yosef dwelled in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Yosef lived 110 years. Yosef saw 3 generations through Ephraim, meaning 3 generations after Ephraim, Ephraim's son, grandson, and great-grandsons. Even the sons of Machir, son of Menashe, were raised on Yosef's knees. And Machir, the son of Menashe, actually entered the land of Israel. He was one of the group that left Egypt, contemporary of Moshe, who left Egypt, and he was old enough that he didn't die in the desert with the decree of the spies. So he actually entered the land of Israel, and he knew Yosef, and Yosef, he was raised by Yosef. So Yosef lived to ripe old age and saw these generations. Yosef, in verse 24, Yosef said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but Hashem will surely remember you and bring you out of this land to the land he swore to Avram, to Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And he then, in verse 25, then Yosef adjured the children of Israel, saying, when God will indeed remember you, then you must bring my bones out of here. And this verse is actually very important. When God will indeed remember you, the Hebrew is Pakod Yifkod Elokim Eschem. Hashem will surely remember you. When Hashem told Moshe to go to the children of Israel, and Moshe said they won't believe me, so he said, say this to you, Hashem will surely remember you. This was a sign that Yosef gave to, divinely inspired, to the children of Israel, that when the Redeemer comes, this is what you'll hear. And in verse 26, that Yosef died at the age of 110 years. They embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt, and eventually was brought up. And when they left the land of Egypt, they in fact brought him back with them to the land of Israel. And like we said, he was buried in Shechem. Chazak, chazak, minis chazek. Thus concludes the book of Bereshis. And just briefly, the Haftarah on page 1145. Same way that in the Parsha, Yaakov is taking leave of his sons and his successors and blessing them and giving his last will and testament. So the Haftarah on page 1145 is from the book of Kings. It's King David is dying and is giving his last instructions to Shlomo, to his son and successor as king, and to Solomon. And it's fascinating Haftarah. If you look at this last will and testament, in verse 2, I go all the way of all the earth, be strong and become a man, safeguard the charge of Hashem your God, to walk in his ways, to observe his decrees, commandments, ordinances, and testimonies, etc. That if you follow the will of Hashem, Hashem will allow you and your children, your descendants, to continue in this dynasty of ruling the Jewish people. And the top of page 1146, saying, no man of you will be cut off from the throne of Israel. That's actually a reference to a verse in this Parsha, the blessing to the tribe of Yehuda. But it continues in verse 5. Furthermore, you know what Yoav, son of Tzuriah, did to me, what he did to the two leaders of the armies of Israel, to Avner, son of Ner, to Amasa, son of Yeser, whom he killed, thereby shedding blood of war in peacetime. Yoav, son of Tzuriah, was King David's general, and he was instrumental in securing David's kingdom. And in fact, after Shaul died, King Saul died, so David had been anointed by the prophet Shmuel, the prophet Samuel, to be the king. But Shaul's son, Ishbosheth, actually tried to succeed his father. And there was this civil war going on between the supporters of David and the supporters of Ishbosheth. And Yoav was instrumental in the victory for King David. But he had gained the confidence of Avner, son of Ner, who was King Shaul's general, and he also fought for Ishbosheth. And in the time of peacetime, with their surrender, he killed him. And also he gained the confidence of Amasa and killed him. So he said, you shall act according to your wisdom and not let his white hair go down to the grave in peace. He said, Mike, I can't do anything to him, but you'll be able to. And he says, don't let him go in peace to the grave. And then, and additionally, he says to the children of Barzillai, the Gileadite, act with kindness. They befriended me when I was fleeing from Avshalom. And Shimi, son of Gera, had pronounced a powerful curse on me. And I swore an oath that I won't harm him. But you, once again, don't let him go in peace to the grave. And that was his last will and testament. It was mostly like, follow the will of God, and that will, and lead the people justly, and that'll secure your throne, and kill that guy and kill that guy. And the commentaries say that that it says in Tehillim, it says, Kel Nakamos Hashem. We say this in the Song of the Day of Wednesdays, on Wednesdays, at the end of Shachas, that God is the God of vengeance. And our sages say about that it says, vengeance is so great that it's surrounded by the name of Hashem. That before that it's Kel, the name of God, Nakamos, vengeance, Hashem, again, the name of God. And our sages say that vengeance is appropriate when it starts with God and ends with God, meaning it has to be 100% from beginning to end for the sake of heaven, without any personal, what's the word? Or any personal reward or any
Agenda.
What?
agenda.
Any personal agenda. That's when vengeance is appropriate. But when it is that way, then it's a good thing. And it's King David was a king who was so strongly felt the influence of Hashem's hashgacha, of the divine providence leading his life, that he felt if he's leaving this world without justice being served in certain cases, so there's a void in the revelation of divine providence, that people look at this and see there's injustice in the world, and that disturbed him to such an extent that this was his last will and testament, that you have to make sure that I'm dying without seeing justice being served. You have to ensure that justice is served. Okay, shkoyach, everybody have a great Shabbos. Okay, shkoyach. Shabbos, give me a second. Oh, where is it?
Either way,
Travis, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Shabbos, good Shabbos.
an interesting remark here.
What's that?